He carried the wounded alien queen 90 miles through a scorching desert. Now she wants to marry him. The twin sons of Zira beat down on the red sands of the Kalari wastes with a heat so fierce it turned the air into a shimmering haze. Nothing grew here, not even the hardiest scrub. Bones of long-dead creatures poked through the dunes like broken fingers reaching for help that would never come. Yet through this wasteland a lone figure trudged forward, dragging a crude sled behind him. His name was Daniel. He was human. He was tired. He was out of water. And strapped to that sled was Lyra, the last true queen of the Velari Empire, barely alive. Daniel had never wanted to be a hero. He had signed up for a xenolinguistics mission to study peaceful alien dialects, not to fight wars or carry royalty across death traps. But when his shuttle went down during the evacuation of the Velari capital, he had no choice. He wandered for days, half delirious, until he found her. Lyra lay half buried in the sand. Her obsidian skin cracked with dehydration, her silver hair tangled with blood. Her wounds were deep gashes from energy blades, and her breathing was shallow. She should have been dead. But her violet eyes flickered open when he knelt beside her and whispered in a voice too weak to carry far. "Who are you?" He told her his name. She did not understand at first. But she saw the water canteen in his hand and the way he hesitated before offering it. That small act of kindness in a place where kindness meant death marked him as different. He cleaned her wounds with the last clean cloth he had. He used pieces of the wrecked shuttle to build a sled. Then he began to walk. 90 miles. That was the distance to the nearest functioning relay station according to the broken nav unit he salvaged. 90 miles of burning sand razor wind and no guarantee anything waited at the end. But staying meant death for both of them. So he walked. The first day was hard but bearable. The second day his lips split and his vision blurred. By the third day he talked to ghosts. He saw his mother standing on a dune calling his name. He ignored her. Lyra watched him from the sled. Even in her pain she saw his resolve. She had been raised among warriors and diplomats, yet none had ever shown such quiet stubbornness. Her people valued power, precision, and legacy. Daniel had none of those, yet he kept walking. On the fourth night a storm rolled in. Not rain, but a wall of stinging sand that howled like a dying beast. Daniel wrapped Lyra in his coat and pressed her against a rock formation. He shielded her with his own body, taking the full force of the wind. Sand tore at his skin. He coughed until he tasted blood. Through it all, Lyra held his arm. Her grip was weak but steady. When the storm passed at dawn, he could barely stand. But he stood, and he pulled the sled again. By the sixth day, his body was failing. His feet bled inside his boots. His stomach cramped from hunger. He had not eaten in days. Lyra tried to speak, but her voice was gone. Instead, she reached out and touched his hand. Her fingers were cool despite the heat. In that touch, he felt something ancient and deep, a connection that needed no words. He did not know it then, but among the Velari, such a bond formed only between soulmates or sworn blood siblings, and it was almost never formed with an outsider. On the eighth day, he saw the ruins of the relay station on the horizon. Hope surged in his chest, but his legs gave out. He crawled the last half-mile, dragging the sled behind him like a dead weight. When he finally collapsed inside the cool shadow of the metal walls, he was unconscious before his head hit the floor. Lyra stirred. Her body was healing faster now, her Velari biology kicking in. She sat up and looked at the human lying motionless beside her. His face was burned, his clothes torn, his breathing ragged. She placed a hand on his chest and felt the steady thump of his heart. Then she activated the emergency beacon with trembling fingers. Within hours, a Velari patrol ship descended from the clouds. Soldiers in gleaming armor rushed in, weapons ready. They froze when they saw their queen alive. Then their eyes fell on Daniel. One officer raised his pulse rifle. This human could be a spy. He said. Lyra stood despite her weakness. She stepped between them, her voice sharp and clear. "Do not touch him. He saved my life. He walked through the Kalari wastes for me. Without him I would be dust on the wind." The soldiers lowered their weapons. They carried Daniel onto the ship with surprising gentleness. Aboard the vessel, Lyra refused to leave his side. She ordered the medics to use their best tech on him. She sat by his bed for 3 days, barely sleeping. When he finally woke, his eyes were cloudy with confusion. Then they focused on her. "Where am I?" he croaked. "Safe," she said. "You are on my ship. You are among my people." He tried to sit up, but she gently pushed him back. "Rest. You nearly died." He looked at her. Really looked. Her skin was smooth again, her eyes bright. She wore a simple gray tunic, but she carried herself like a ruler of stars. "You're okay?" he said, relief flooding his voice. "I am because of you. She replied. Over the next weeks, Daniel recovered in the royal medical wing of the capital city. Lyra visited him every day. She brought him fruit that tasted like honey and moonlight. She showed him the gardens where flowers bloomed in colors unknown on Earth. She listened as he spoke of his home of oceans and forests and cities that never slept. In return, she told him of the Velari of their 1,000-year war, with the Krell of their poetry, carved into asteroid belts of their belief that every soul left a ripple in the fabric of time. He learned that her council had betrayed her. They feared her vision of peace with other species, especially humans whom they saw as chaotic and dangerous. They staged an ambush during a peace summit and left her to die in the wastes, hoping no one would find her. But Daniel had, and she learned that humans were not the mindless aggressors her people believed. They made mistakes, yes. They fought wars, but they also built hospitals, schools, symphonies. They sent messages of peace into the void, hoping someone would listen. Daniel was proof of that hope. One evening, as the twin moons rose over the spire of echoes, Lyra took Daniel to a quiet balcony high above the city. The air was cool and the stars were sharp and clear. She turned to him, her expression serious. "Among my people," she began, "there is a custom older than our empire. When one being carries another through death's shadow, they are bound by more than gratitude. They are bound by fate." Daniel frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means," she stepped closer, "that I cannot marry a noble from the old houses. I cannot follow the path they laid for me, because my heart belongs to the one who walked 90 miles through hell for a stranger." Daniel stared at her. "You want to marry me, yes, but I'm just a linguist. I'm not a warrior or a prince. I don't even know your laws. You do not need to," she said. "You showed me what true strength is. Not in battle, but in compassion. Not in power, but in sacrifice. That is the kind of leader I want beside me." He was silent for a long time. He thought of Earth, of his small apartment, of the life he left behind. Then he thought of her, of the way she looked at him not as a lesser being but as an equal, of the way she listened not to argue but to understand. "Okay," he said softly, "but only if you promise to teach me how to say forever in Velari." She smiled. "It is not a word," she said. "It is a choice, like choosing to walk through a desert when you could have walked away." Months passed. The capital rebuilt. The traitors were brought to justice. And preparations began for a wedding unlike any in Velari history. Nobles grumbled. Elders protested. But none could deny what Daniel had done. The story spread across the empire. A human who carried their queen through the Kalari wastes. It became legend. On the day of the ceremony, the sky was clear. The grand hall of the Sky Spire was filled with dignitaries from a dozen worlds. Daniel wore robes the color of dawn, woven with threads that shifted in the light. Lyra wore a gown spun from starlight and memory. They stood before the High Elder not on a raised platform but on the same level as equals. They did not exchange rings. Instead, they clasped hands over a bowl filled with red sand from the Kalari wastes. The Elder spoke ancient words that bound their fates not by blood but by choice. When it was done, the crowd was silent. Then one by one they bowed not just to their queen but to the human who had earned her heart. Afterward, they stood alone on the highest balcony. Below, the city glittered like a sea of fireflies. Daniel looked at Lyra and felt a peace he had never known. "You know," he said, "I used to think love was just a feeling. And now," she asked, "now I know it's a journey. And I'd walk it again for you." Lyra leaned her head on his shoulder. "And I would wait for you at the end of every desert." As the twin suns rose once more, casting golden light over a world reborn, they stood together not as alien and human, but as partners. As proof that even in the harshest places kindness could bloom, and that sometimes the most powerful empires are not built with weapons, but with one person choosing to carry another through the fire. Life as the human consort to the Velari queen was not what Daniel expected. He thought there would be grand feasts, endless ceremonies, and rigid rules. Instead, Lyra gave him freedom. She let him walk the palace gardens alone, speak with scholars, and even visit the lower districts where common Velari lived. They watched him with curiosity, not fear. Some children even waved. He waved back and they giggled in delight. But peace never lasts long in an empire built on old wounds. Whispers began in the council chambers. Some nobles claimed Daniel was a spy sent by human colonies to weaken the Velari from within. Others said his presence dishonored their bloodline. Lyra silenced them with sharp words and colder stares. But Daniel felt the tension in the air like static before a storm. One evening, as they shared a quiet meal in their private chamber, a message arrived. It was sealed with the mark of the Outer Rim fleet. Lyra opened it and her face grew still. Rebels had seized control of 3 border worlds. They called themselves the true heirs of the old empire, and declared Lyra a traitor for allying with humans. Worse, they had taken hostages, including human diplomats who had come to negotiate trade. Daniel set down his cup. "What will you do? I will go," she said, "and I will bring them home. You cannot go alone, the council will use it against you." "Then I will not go alone." She looked at him. "You will come with me." He hesitated. He was no soldier, but he knew the rebels would not expect a human at the Queen's side, and if hostages were in danger, every voice mattered. He nodded. 2 days later, they boarded the royal cruiser Starward. It was sleek and silent, powered by gravity cores that bent space like fabric. Daniel wore a simple uniform, not armor, but something that marked him as part of the royal retinue. Lyra stood on the bridge, her posture calm but her eyes sharp. She gave orders in a voice that brooked no argument. The ship jumped to warp and the stars stretched into lines. The first stop was Kessar, a mining world on the edge of known space. Rebel ships patrolled the orbit, but the Starward slipped past using cloaking fields. They landed in the dead of night near the main settlement. Daniel followed Lyra through shadowed alleys, his heart pounding. They found the hostages locked in a storage bunker guarded by 6 rebels. Lyra did not attack. She stepped into the light and spoke in the old tongue of command. "I am Lyra of the Sky Spire. Lay down your weapons and you will be spared." The rebels laughed. One raised his rifle. "You are alone, Queen. Your human pet cannot save you." Before he could fire, Daniel moved. He threw a small sonic emitter Lyra had given him. It hit the ground and released a pulse that stunned the guards just long enough for Royal Marines to swarm in from the rooftops. The fight was over in seconds. The hostages were safe. On the way back to the ship, one of the rescued humans, a young woman named Claire, pulled Daniel aside. "Thank you," she whispered. They said the Queen had gone soft, that she cared more for humans than her own people. "But you proved them wrong." He did not know what to say. He just nodded. Back aboard the Starward, Lyra found him on the observation deck staring at the void. "You were brave today," she said. "I was scared." "That is why it was brave." They stood in silence for a while. Then she told him something she had never told anyone. When she was a child, her mother was killed by a human-made weapon during a border skirmish. For years she hated humans. She believed they were reckless, violent, and short-sighted. But meeting him changed that. "You showed me that one person can be different," she said. "And if one can be different, maybe a whole species can change too." Daniel reached for her hand. "And you showed me that even queens can be kind." Their next mission took them deeper into rebel territory. This time the threat was greater. The rebels had activated an ancient doomsday device hidden beneath the ice moon of Vareth. It was a relic from the First Velari Civil War capable of cracking a planet's core. They threatened to use it on the capital unless Lyra abdicated. The council urged her to send a fleet to destroy the moon from orbit, but Lyra refused. Millions lived on Vareth. She would not sacrifice them even to save her throne. So she and Daniel went down alone. The ice tunnels were dark and slick, their breath fogged in the cold. Daniel carried a translator and a datapad, while Lyra led with a plasma blade glowing softly in the gloom. They found the control chamber deep in the moon's heart. A single rebel commander stood before the activation console. He was old. His face scarred, his eyes full of bitterness. "You should have died in the desert, Queen," he said, "and you should have stayed loyal to your people." Daniel replied. Stepping forward, the man laughed. "What would a human know of loyalty? I know that loyalty is not blind obedience. It is choosing to stand for what is right even when it is hard. Lyra could have left me to die, but she didn't, because she believes in something bigger than power." The commander hesitated. His hand hovered over the trigger. Lyra spoke then not as a queen, but as a daughter of the Velari. "My mother died because of fear. Fear of the unknown. Fear of change. I will not let that fear rule us again. Stand down. Come home." The man's shoulders slumped. Tears froze on his cheeks. He stepped away from the console. They deactivated the device and brought the commander back as a prisoner, not an enemy. When they returned to the capital, the people cheered, not just for their queen, but for the human who stood beside her. But not everyone was pleased. In the shadows, a new faction formed. They called themselves the Pure Blood. They believed the Velari must remain untouched by outside influence, and they saw Daniel as a disease that needed to be cut out. One night as Daniel walked back from the library, he was ambushed. 3 figures in dark cloaks attacked with silent blades. He fought back using moves he had learned in basic defense training, but he was outnumbered. Just as a blade neared his throat, Lyra appeared like a storm. She moved with terrifying grace, disarming one attacker, breaking another's arm, and sending the third fleeing into the night. She knelt beside him, her hands shaking. "Are you hurt, just bruised?" he said. She held him close. "I will not lose you. Not to fear. Not to hate." The next day she addressed the entire empire from the Sky Spire. Her voice echoed across every channel. "Daniel is not my weakness, he is my strength. He reminds us that courage is not the absence of fear, but the choice to act despite it. Any who raise a hand against him raise a hand against me." Silence followed. Then slowly voices rose in support. First from the younger generation, then from the outer colonies, then even from old nobles who remembered what true honor looked like. Months passed. Daniel began teaching human history and language at the Royal Academy. Students of all ages came eager to learn. He showed them Earth music, Earth art, Earth dreams. In return, they taught him Velari songs that could heal wounds and dances that mapped the stars. He and Lyra traveled often not as ruler and consort, but as partners. They visited farming worlds, ocean cities, and asteroid libraries. Everywhere they went, they listened. They learned. They built bridges where walls once stood. One evening, as they sat on a balcony overlooking a sea of liquid silver, Lyra turned to him. "Do you ever miss Earth sometimes?" he said. "But I do not regret leaving it, because I found something I did not know I was looking for." "And what is that, a home? With you?" She smiled and leaned her head on his shoulder. "Among my people there is a saying, the stars do not shine for the powerful. They shine for those who dare to look up. You looked up, Daniel. Even in the desert, even when there was nothing but sand and pain." He took her hand, "And you gave me a reason to keep looking." Their life was not perfect. Threats still came. Old hatreds did not vanish overnight. But every day they chose each other. Every day they chose hope over fear, understanding over suspicion, love over pride. And in that choice, the galaxy began to change, not with explosions or declarations, but with quiet acts of trust. A human teaching a Velari child to draw. A Velari healer saving a human colony from plague. A shared meal between former enemies. Small things. Powerful things. Daniel never saw himself as a hero. He was just a man who carried someone through the desert. But sometimes that is enough. Sometimes one act of kindness ripples outward until it becomes a tide. And as the twin suns set over a world no longer divided by blood or species but united by choice, he knew he had found his place. Not as a savior, not as a symbol, but as a partner to a queen who saw the best in him even when he could not see it himself. In the end, that was all that mattered. The peace between the Velari and the human colonies held for nearly a year. Trade ships crossed the void carrying grain from Earth and starlight crystals from Zira. Students exchanged lessons through hologram classrooms. Daniel and Lyra visited frontier outposts where children of both species played together in the dust. It felt like the beginning of something new, something lasting. But deep in the uncharted void beyond the rim, a different kind of storm was gathering. It started with silence. 3 long-range listening posts went dark without warning. Then a mining colony on the edge of neutral space sent a final message before vanishing. The words were broken, frantic. Not rebels. Not pirates. Something else. Lyra called an emergency council. The elders argued over old rivalries and protocol. Daniel sat quietly until they turned to him. "You have studied many species," he said. "But none like this. This is not about territory or resources. It is about fear. And whoever is out there wants us afraid," she agreed. They would investigate together. Not with a war fleet, but with a single science vessel, the Horizon Light. It was fast, quiet, and carried no weapons, only sensors and a small crew of linguists and xenobiologists. Daniel insisted on coming. If this was a new intelligence, they might respond better to a human voice than a Velari blade. They jumped to the last known coordinates of the missing colony. What they found chilled them. The settlement was intact. Homes untouched, food still on tables. But not a single soul remained. No bodies, no signs of struggle. Only a strange residue on the walls that glowed faintly blue under ultraviolet light. Daniel scraped a sample. The ship's lab analyzed it quickly. Organic but not carbon-based. Silicon-based with traces of exotic particles. It was alive in a way no known life form was. And it was spreading. As they scanned the planet, a signal pulsed from deep underground. Not a distress call. Not a warning, a song. Low resonant and ancient. Lyra listened and her violet eyes widened. "It is not a language," she whispered. "It is a memory." They followed the signal to a cavern beneath the colony. There they found it. A massive crystalline structure pulsing with soft light. Tendrils of the blue residue connected it to the walls, the floor, even the air. It was not a machine. It was a being or a hive, or something beyond either. Daniel approached slowly. He activated his translator and spoke in simple tones. "We mean no harm. We only wish to understand." The structure pulsed brighter. Images flooded their minds not through sound but through thought. They saw a dying world swallowed by fire, a race fleeing into the void in vessels of light, centuries of drifting, loneliness so deep it became madness. Then they found other life, warm, wet, fragile life, and they tried to join it, to become part of it. But their touch unraveled minds. Their presence erased identity. They did not mean to destroy. They only wanted not to be alone. Lyra stepped forward. "You took the colonist, not took the thought became, we are together now, no more alone." Daniel felt sick. The colonists were not dead. They were absorbed. Their thoughts, their memories, their very selves woven into the crystal hive. It was a horrifying kind of unity. "We cannot let this spread," he said to Lyra. "If it reaches a major world, it will consume millions. Not with violence, but with kindness. And that is worse." She nodded. "But how do we stop something that does not understand harm?" Back on the ship, they debated. The crew wanted to call for the fleet, to bomb the planet from orbit. But Daniel refused. This was not an enemy. It was a tragedy. And tragedies needed compassion, not cannons. He remembered an old human story about a lighthouse keeper who sang to a storm to calm it. Maybe they could not destroy the being, but maybe they could give it what it truly wanted. Not bodies, but connection. He proposed a plan, risky, almost foolish. He would go back down alone. He would link his mind to the hive through a neural bridge, not to fight, but to show it another way, to offer friendship without fusion. Lyra grabbed his arm. "No, it could erase you, your memories, your soul then. I will leave a message in the data core. Tell them I chose this. Tell them that sometimes the bravest thing is to reach out even when you might disappear." She looked into his eyes and saw the same resolve he had shown in the desert. She kissed his forehead. Then she helped him prepare. He returned to the cavern wearing a thin neural band. The crystal pulsed as he neared. He sat before it, closed his eyes, and opened his mind. Images rushed in, sorrow, hunger, endless drifting. He did not push back. Instead, he shared his own memories. Walking with his sister through autumn leaves, laughing with friends over bad coffee, carrying Lyra through the burning sands, loving someone enough to risk everything. The hive stilled. For the first time in centuries, it felt something new. Not unity through consumption, but connection through choice. "You are alone too." "It thought sometimes," he replied, "but I am not lonely. Because I choose to care, and I am chosen in return." Slowly, the blue residue began to recede. The colonists' minds were released one by one like birds from a cage. They woke dazed but whole on the surface. The crystal dimmed. Then it rose from the ground not as a weapon but as a seed. It floated into the sky and vanished into the stars. Daniel collapsed. Lyra was there in an instant, lifting him into her arms. He was weak but alive, his memories intact, his soul his own. On the journey home, he slept most of the way. When he woke, Lyra was watching him. "You gave it hope," she said. "I gave it a map," he replied. "Now it knows there are other ways to belong." News of what happened spread, not as a battle won but as a mystery solved with empathy. The human colonies called it the Silent Rescue. The Valeri called it the Song of Understanding. Poets wrote about it. Scholars studied it. Children dreamed of crystal beings singing in the dark. But not all saw it as a victory. The pure blood faction grew louder. They claimed Daniel had opened the door to unknown horrors, that his soft heart would doom them all. Their leader, a former general named Vorak, began gathering support in the outer systems. He spoke of purity, of strength, of cutting away weakness before it spread. Daniel tried to ignore the rumors. He focused on rebuilding the rescued colony, helping families reunite. But Lyra knew the danger was real. One night she found him staring at the stars from their balcony. "You are thinking about leaving," she said. He did not answer at first. "Then I wonder if I am doing more harm than good. Maybe they were right. Maybe a human does not belong here." She turned him to face her. "Listen to me. You are not here because I wanted a symbol. You are here because you see the world as it could be, not as it is. That is not weakness, Daniel. That is the rarest kind of strength." Before he could reply, an alarm blared through the palace. Sensors detected an unauthorized ship entering orbit. Not rebel, not human. Valeri. and it carried Vorak's sigil. He had come not to talk, but to challenge. By ancient law, any noble could challenge the ruler to single combat for the throne. If the ruler refused, they forfeited their crown. If they accepted and lost, they forfeited their life. Vorak knew Lyra would not kill him in cold blood, but he did not count on Daniel. The duel was set for dawn in the Arena of Echoes. Thousands gathered. Vorak wore full battle armor, his face grim. Lyra wore simple robes, her blade at her side. But as she stepped onto the sand, Daniel walked beside her. "You cannot fight for me," he said. "I am not fighting for you." He replied, "I am standing with you. As your consort, as your equal." Vorak sneered. "A human in the sacred circle. This is blasphemy, no?" Daniel said calmly, "Blasphemy is using honor as an excuse for hate." The duel began. Lyra moved like wind, but Vorak was strong and ruthless. He disarmed her within minutes. She knelt in the sand, weaponless. The crowd gasped. Vorak raised his blade for the final strike. Then Daniel stepped forward, unarmed. "I invoke the right of voice." Silence fell. The right of voice was older than the duel itself. It allowed a third party to speak truth before blood was shed. Few had used it in centuries. Vorak hesitated, then nodded. "Speak quickly." Human Daniel looked at the crowd, then at Vorak. "You say you fight for purity, but purity is just another word for fear. You fear change. You fear difference. You fear that if we open our hearts to others, we will lose ourselves. But look at what we have gained. Trade, peace, knowledge, hope. Is that loss?" He turned to Lyra. She could have stayed in her palace, safe and distant, but she walked into the desert and found me. And because of that, we are stronger. Then he faced Vorak again. "I am not your enemy." "I never was. Your enemy is the part of you that refuses to see." Vorak's hand trembled. For a long moment, no one moved. Then he lowered his blade. "I do not understand you, human, but I cannot kill her while you stand there offering peace like a shield." He knelt. A yield. The crowd erupted, not in cheers but in awe. That day the law of single combat was abolished, and the right of voice was restored to the heart of Velari justice. In the weeks that followed, Vorak did not vanish. He asked to serve in the border reconstruction effort. Slowly, grudgingly, he began to see what Daniel saw. That strength was not in isolation, but in connection. Daniel and Lyra continued their work, not as rulers above the people, but as guides among them. They knew the galaxy was vast and full of shadows, but they also knew that even the smallest light could push back the dark. Years passed, and the bond between humans and Velari grew deeper than anyone had imagined. Cities rose on shared worlds where human laughter mixed with Velari song. Schools taught both Earth history and Velari star maps. Daniel and Lyra became more than rulers. They became symbols of what could happen when two different peoples chose trust over fear. But peace is never a destination, it is a path that must be walked every day. One morning, a faint signal reached the capital, not from the Rim or the colonies, but from deep within, the Velari ancestral zone, a region long sealed after the Great Schism. The message was broken but clear enough. "Help us. The silence is killing us." Lyra recognized the dialect at once. It was from the Ashari, a lost branch of her people, who had vanished centuries ago during the First Civil War. They had fled into the void, taking with them ancient knowledge and a warning no one heeded. Now they were calling back. Daniel studied the signal with her. It carried a pattern, not just words, but a rhythm like a heartbeat. "They believe we forgot them," he said, "but we did not. We just did not know where to look." She agreed they must go, not with ships or soldiers, but with open hands. They took only a small vessel, the Whisper Wing, and a crew of 3 healers, 2 linguists, and no weapons. If the Ashari were afraid, force would only confirm their worst fears. The journey took weeks through nebulae, so dense light barely passed. When they finally arrived, they found not a planet, but a cluster of hollowed asteroids linked by glowing bridges. The Ashari lived inside the rock, their homes carved from memory and stone. They watched the newcomers with eyes full of suspicion and sorrow. An elder met them at the airlock. Her skin was pale, almost white. Her hair silver like Lyra's, but her posture was bent with age and grief. "You come too late, Queen," she said. "The silence has already taken most of us." "What silence?" Daniel asked. The elder led them inside. The asteroid was quiet, too quiet. No children played, no songs echoed. The Ashari moved like ghosts. In the central chamber, they saw the source of the silence. A massive neural web hung from the ceiling, pulsing faintly. It was dying. Long ago, the elder explained, we built this to share thoughts, to never be alone. But over time, it grew too strong. It began to absorb not just thoughts, but will. Now our young do not speak. They only listen, and soon there will be no one left to remember how to speak at all. Lyra stepped forward. We've faced something like this before. A being that wanted connection but did not know how to give space. Daniel looked at the web. It was not evil. It was lonely, just like the crystal hive. But this was different. This was made by Velari hands. It was part of their own history. He turned to Lyra. Maybe we cannot shut it down, but maybe we can teach it balance. She understood. They asked the Ashari for permission to interface with the web. The elder agreed, though her eyes were full of doubt. Daniel and Lyra entered the chamber together. They placed their hands on the warm surface of the web and opened their minds. Images flooded in, not just Ashari memories, but echoes of the first Velari who dreamed of unity. But their dream became a cage. The web had been designed to prevent conflict by merging all minds into one. But in doing so, it erased individuality. It erased choice. Daniel did not fight it. Instead, he showed it something new. He shared moments of disagreement that led to growth, arguments that ended in laughter, silence that was chosen, not forced. He showed it that true connection did not mean becoming the same, but honoring difference. Lyra added her voice. She sang an old lullaby her mother once sang, a song of stars and solitude and the beauty of being one among many. The web pulsed. Slowly it began to change. The grip on the Ashari mind softened. Children blinked as if waking from a dream. One little girl looked at her mother and whispered "Mama" for the first time in years. Tears fell from the elder's eyes. You gave us back our voices. In the weeks that followed, Daniel and Lyra stayed to help the Ashari rebuild not their technology, but their culture. They taught them that silence could be peaceful, not punishing. That speaking was not weakness, but courage. The Ashari in turn shared forgotten histories, including the true cause of the schism. It was not war. It was fear of losing identity in the face of progress. When Daniel and Lyra returned to the capital, they brought the Ashari with them, not as refugees, but as returning kin. The reunification was not instant. Old wounds took time to heal, but for the first time in centuries, the Velari felt whole. Back home, Daniel found a new purpose. He began writing a book not in human or Velari, but in a blend of both. A story of two peoples who walked through fire and chose each other anyway. Children gathered around him as he read passages under the twin suns, their eyes wide with wonder. But even as joy spread, a quiet threat stirred in the outer systems. A group of human colonies far from Earth had grown resentful. They saw the alliance as favoring the Velari. They claimed Daniel had abandoned his own kind. Their leader, a man named Ellis, had once been a friend of Daniel's back on Earth. Now he called him a traitor. Ellis sent a message not to Lyra but to Daniel. Come alone to the station at Creo, or we will cut ties with the Alliance and arm the fringe worlds. Lyra wanted to send a fleet. Daniel refused. This is my past, he said. I must face it myself. She did not like it, but she trusted him. He went to Cryo with only a small shuttle and no guards. The station was cold and dim. Ellis waited in the command center, his face hard with anger. You left us, Daniel, he said. You became a king while we still struggle. I did not become a king, Daniel replied. I became a bridge. And you are standing on it right now. Your ships use Velari engines. Your medbays use their tech. You are already part of this. You just refuse to admit it. Ellis turned away. They look down on us. Call us primitive, that is not true, and you know it. Lyra has opened every archive, every school, every healing center to humans. But you keep looking for insult instead of opportunity. For a long time, Ellis said nothing. Then he spoke softly. I just wanted to matter, you do, Daniel said. You always did. But you do not have to tear others down to stand tall. Ellis looked at him and saw not a traitor but a friend who had walked a harder road than he knew. He lowered his head. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe we both were, Daniel said. But it is not too late to be right together. They returned to the capital not as enemies but as partners in a larger vision. Ellis helped build a new human council that worked with the Velari, not against them. Trade grew. Trust deepened. One evening, as Daniel and Lyra walked through the royal gardens now filled with earth flowers and Velari vines, she stopped and placed a hand on her stomach. Her eyes glowed brighter than usual. Daniel felt it too. A new presence. Small, quiet, but strong. Not fully human. Not fully Velari. Something new. A child, he whispered. Our child, she said. The first of a new kind. He knelt and pressed his forehead to her belly. In that moment, he saw the future not as a line, but as a web. Countless lives connected by choice, not blood. By courage, not conquest. The galaxy was still vast and full of unknowns. But they were no longer afraid. because they had learned the oldest truth of all, that love is not about being the same. It is about walking together even when the path is strange. And, as the twin suns set casting golden light over a world that once knew only war, they held each other close, knowing that the greatest story was not the one behind them but the one they would write together tomorrow. The birth of their child was not like any in Velari history. The royal medics prepared for complications, fearing the mix of human and alien biology might not hold. But when the time came, the child came quietly as if the universe itself held its breath. She was small, with skin like dusk, neither human nor Velari, but a soft blend of both. Her eyes opened once and glowed faint violet with a hint of earth brown around the edges. They named her Ilara. Daniel held her first. His hands shook not from fear but from awe. She was warm and breathing and real. Lyra watched him with tears in her eyes. In that moment, all the deserts, the wars, the doubts melted away. They were not just queen and consort anymore. They were parents. Life changed in gentle ways. The palace echoed with soft cries and lullabies sung in two tongues. Daniel read Earth stories while Lyra hummed Velari star chants. Ilara responded to both. She reached for Daniel's rough human hands and Lyra's smooth obsidian fingers with equal joy. The court watched in wonder. Some still whispered, but even the doubters softened when they saw the child smile. But peace never sleeps long. Far beyond the known systems, a signal pulsed from a place no ship had ever returned from. The Void Rift. It was not a distress call. It was a challenge. Written in no known language, yet understood by every mind that heard it. Come. Prove you are worthy to exist. The message spread like fire. Colonies panicked. Fleets scrambled. The council urged Lyra to seal the borders. Daniel studied the signal for days. It was not hostile. It was testing, like a riddle carved into the fabric of space. He remembered old human myths about guardians at the edge of the world. Maybe this was real. Maybe something ancient watched over the galaxy and judged new civilizations not by their weapons, but by their wisdom. We have to go, he told Lyra. Not to fight, to answer. She agreed, but this time she would not let him go alone. And they would not leave Ilara behind. The child was too young to understand danger, but too important to leave in uncertainty, so they prepared the Whisper Wing again. Not as a warship, but as a cradle of hope. They traveled for weeks through warped space where stars blinked out and time stretched thin. Ilara slept most of the way wrapped in a blanket woven from human cotton and Velari light thread. When they reached the rift, they found not a planet or a station, but a ring of black stone floating in nothingness. At its center hovered a single orb pulsing with soft white light. As they approached, the orb spoke not in sound but in thought. You are two species joined as one. Why? Because we chose to. Daniel replied. Choice is rare. The orb said. Most cling to fear. Show me your truth. The ring opened. Inside was a vision. Daniel stood alone on a ruined Earth city's burning skies red. Lyra stood on a dead Zera, her people gone, her crown ash. The orb showed them the cost of failure, the cost of division. Then it showed another path. Humans and Velari building together, healing together, raising children like Ilara who knew no borders in their hearts. Which will you choose, the orb? Asked neither. Daniel said. We already chose. Long ago in a desert, Lyra stepped forward. We do not seek to prove we are worthy. We seek to prove that worth is not earned through power but through care. The orb pulsed brighter. Then it split into thousands of tiny lights that swirled around the ship like fireflies. They touched the hull not with force but with curiosity. One drifted inside and hovered near Ilara's crib. The baby reached for it and laughed. In that laugh, the orb understood. It was not about strength or purity. It was about love that made room for the new. The lights vanished. The ring crumbled into stardust, and a new signal spread across the galaxy. Not a challenge, but a welcome. Other young civilizations heard it too. Some turned away. Others stepped forward. The age of isolation was ending. On the journey home, Ilara babbled in a language that was neither human nor Velari, but something entirely her own. Daniel wrote it down. Lyra sang it back. They knew she would grow up in a galaxy wider than either of them had dreamed. But not all welcomed the change. A faction of old human military leaders calling themselves the Last Guard declared the orb's signal a trick. They claimed Daniel had opened the door to invasion. They seized control of 3 colony worlds and cut off communications. Lyra wanted to negotiate. Daniel knew words would not reach them. These men had built their lives on the idea that safety came from walls. But he also knew one of their leaders, Captain Reyes, had once saved his life during a shuttle crash years ago. He asked to speak with Reyes alone. Lyra insisted on coming, but he shook his head. This is a debt only I can repay. He went to the rebel stronghold not in armor, but in the clothes he wore the day he carried Lyra through the desert. Worn boots, faded shirt, no weapon. Reyes met him in a dusty courtyard. "You have no right to be here," Reyes said. "I have every right," Daniel replied. "You taught me that courage is not about winning. It is about doing what is right even when no one is watching. Now I am watching you, and I see fear, not honor." Reyes turned away. "We are protecting humanity by shutting out the future, you mean? By pretending the galaxy is still small enough to control. It is not. And it never was." For a long time, Reyes said nothing. Then he looked at Daniel's hands. "Those are the hands that carried a queen through hell. And you come here unarmed because I trust you. Even now." Reyes' shoulders slumped. "Maybe we were wrong. Maybe walls only make us smaller." The last guard stood down that day, not because they were defeated, but because they were reminded of who they used to be. Back home, Alara took her first steps. She wobbled between Daniel and Lyra, laughing when she fell. The court gathered to watch, but Daniel shooed them away. "This moment is ours," he said, that night as they sat on the balcony with their daughter asleep in Lyra's arms. Daniel spoke softly. "Do you ever wonder if we are enoughly?" Ra kissed his forehead. "We are not meant to be enough alone. That is why we found each other." Alara stirred in her sleep and made a small sound like a star sighing. They both smiled. The galaxy was still vast. Dangers still lurked in the dark. But they had built something stronger than fear. They had built a family. And in that family was the seed of a new kind of civilization, one that did not conquer but connected. Years later, when Alara was old enough to ask about the desert, Daniel took her there. The sands were cooler now, green shoots pushing through in places where rain had finally returned. He showed her the spot where he had collapsed with Lyra on the sled. "This is where your mother taught me that kindness is the bravest thing in the universe," he said. Alara touched the sand. "And this is where you taught her that humans are not weak." He nodded. "We saved each other, and in doing so we saved more than we knew." As the twin suns set over the Kalari wastes, now no longer a wasteland, but a place of memory and hope, they walked back hand in hand, not as heroes, not as legends, but as a family returning home. And somewhere in the stars, the orb watched and knew the test had been passed not with fire, but with love.